Hello and welcome to HCTS. We're live from Las Vegas. My name is Al Sadowski. I'm the Research Vice President for Infrastructure Services at 451 Research. I'm here with a couple of my analyst colleagues, Dan Thompson, Simon Robinson. Why don't you guys say hello?
Hello. Hey.
All right. So today we're here to talk about, has Amazon won the cloud or is there opportunity for others? And they are kind of the big gorilla in the room. Everybody in enterprise is thinking about AWS and how they either go to business with them or why they shouldn't. Every vendor in the space is also looking for reasons to compete with AWS or partner with AWS. If you look at them in terms of overall market size, in 2012 they were a $2 billion business, and now in 2016 are a $10 billion run rate, and their market size is as big as IBM's, and it took IBM 100 years to do. If you look at them in terms of the overall product portfolio and how fast they roll out new capabilities, they clearly won in that respect. They clearly won in overall revenue generation, as their revenue is equal to the next 203 service providers that we track as part of our 451 market monitor. So depending on how you ask the question, they probably won the cloud, but Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. My knee-jerk reaction, the answer is no, they've not won. But I think it's like I said, it's an interesting question because we hear service providers all the time saying, well, Amazon has won, or have they won, and should I even bother offering my own cloud services? What does this mean for my managed services going forward? And so it's good to ask the question in that way because people are thinking it, but I think it's sort of the wrong question. And I think the right question is there something left for me to do as a service provider? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. So as we've been here at HCTS, we've seen that, as far as corporate spend, just like 70% of their corporate cloud spend is above infrastructure, and that includes like managed services and other things. So there's definitely room for people to play here, and I think what Amazon has been able to do is sort of steer the conversation for sure, but I think that opens up a huge opportunity for service providers to jump into that conversation and say, here's what we can do on top of AWS, here's what we can do instead of AWS, and here's how we can help you think about it as an organization.
Simon, as the resident voice of the enterprise, on demand, demand side research, what's your perspective on that question?
Yeah, so we spend, my role in the organization is to look at and to work with enterprises to understand the customer view of how they're looking to evolve their IT environments and their IT strategies, how they're looking to embrace transformation. It's a slightly loaded question, is that has it won? Well, the game's not over. We're still kind of, only 10 years into this, and absolutely what Amazon has done by any measure has been pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. I'd say where they have won so far, where they continue to win, is in owning the narrative. Right? We're here at HCTS in Vegas. We've got 500 delegates here. And I've lost count, I couldn't even begin to count how many times we've mentioned AWS over the last 2 days in whatever context, in the context of M&A, in terms of financing strategies, in terms of how service providers differentiate and bring services and capabilities to market. They are absolutely front and center of this market. So sure. That's the challenge for everybody else, right? You're absolutely right. There is a huge amount of opportunity, and the market in which Amazon plays, it is dominant, right? Mm-hmm. But that's just a small part of the market overall. Right. But the challenge for the service providers, for more traditional infrastructure and IT players, is how do they take back control of that narrative, and what does that look like?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Now you talk about dominance, and in the case of the public cloud market, AWS clearly the market leader, and some very well-known players have actually exited the public cloud space. Rackspace, they used to do battle with AWS and they competed on price, and now their CEO is talking about they want to be the number one managed service provider for AWS. Mm-hmm. Verizon, who one of the top 10 telcos, or one of the telcos that's in the top 10 IT infrastructure revenues bucket, they turned off their self-service public cloud, still offer it in conjunction with other services. and HP also exited the public cloud. So if you think about AWS in terms of the dominance and having other properties exit, they won the cloud in that respect. But the overall revenue opportunity is in the long tail. That top 10 of infrastructure providers are only doing about a third of the overall revenue of the space. And we kind of break them out into managed service providers and hyperscalers and systems integrators. And how should service providers start to think about what their role is amongst those players in those categories, Dan?
Yeah, well, let me back you up for just 1 second. You said that Amazon has won the public cloud, and I would put a little bit of an asterisk on that and say that they've won it in the United States.
Right.
Because
in terms of they forced others to exit based on their dominance,
and
not that they've...
It's a totally fair statement, and even that I would put a little bit of a wrapper from the United States perspective, because if we look at India, the exact opposite has happened. We've seen companies say, I'm okay to go up against AWS, I'm going to continue to offer my own public cloud because Indian businesses like doing business with Indian businesses. In China, because of the regulation situation there, we've seen Alibaba, who is a Chinese-based company, flourish. AWS is struggling. Microsoft had to sell their infrastructure to a Chinese-based company to even offer services there. So it's an interesting sort of paradigm that happens across the globe. To your question though, like how do service providers think about this? Well, there's a couple of different ways. So, like you were saying a second ago, we've seen service providers embrace AWS instead of try to keep them at bay. And so they may offer services to help people get to AWS. They may help people manage their stuff in AWS, or they may offer alternatives too. And I think it's powerful depending on how you drive the conversation, and we kind of dive into that a little bit. If we look geographically, so if you look at Chattanooga, Tennessee as an example, it's a small town America. There's huge wins happening there for Microsoft Azure. Why? Well, because there's a local company there that's an advocate for Azure. They spend a load of money sponsoring softball tournaments and participating in charity events. They're the ones driving the conversation, and that's why people are going to Azure. And I think as a service provider, once you get the trust of your customers, you now control that narrative. You still have to deal with the overall narrative that's happened nationally, and you need to have answers to the question of what do I do about AWS? But I still think there's lots of opportunities there for service providers to say, look, some workloads, yes, absolutely make sense in AWS. Some workloads, they need to stay on-prem or be in a private cloud or whatever.
Right, and to give you the kind of the enterprise perspective, I think many organizations have certainly have had this kind of cloud-first strategy, and even in some cases it's an Amazon-first strategy. Clearly there is a desire, there's an imperative coming often from the top down of the organisation to move in that direction. The challenge often where this kind of falls down is that there aren't partnerships in place to help the organisation move services, capabilities, applications and workloads to that environment. And I think that's where service providers and other ISVs, even traditional technology players, providers serving that market can absolutely play a role in helping enable that.
Yeah, and I think to sort of dovetail off of that, if we take the conversation to sort of the small end of things and the SME, SMB, I mean, there's a whole host of businesses out there that want to do something with the cloud. They just have no idea how. And so service providers can sort of answer that question for them and be the help to get to the cloud.
Right, so the one that comes up in our research all the time is disaster recovery.
Yeah.
So disaster recovery as a service, smaller businesses in particular really have always really struggled with DR. They don't have the resources, the capabilities, the financing to actually stand up a separate data center. So they're looking at cloud to really fulfill that role, either through a hyperscaler or through a partner. Now actually delivering against that is taking a little bit more time just because of the complexities of delivering that type of service. But I think the opportunity there is still pretty massive, especially for smaller, mid-sized organizations.
So in that Voice of the Enterprise research, we asked people who are they going to buy from? Which vendor they're going to buy from for their cloud services. And it was interesting, they had choices of ISV and cloud provider and telco and system integrator. And the research, the survey results showed that they are typically going to go to that ISV for SaaS solutions, which makes sense. it makes sense that the cloud providers are going to be the first choice for public cloud services. Telcos were kind of evenly spaced across all those venues, but SIs was the predominant choice for a private cloud environment. What do you think are some of the reasons that an enterprise is picking one of those venues?
Yeah, so it's a fairly straightforward question, but the answer is, give a typical analyst answer, it depends, right? And there are just so many variables, and we've done quite a lot of work in our research and looking at the data to try and understand, okay, why do organizations move certain processes and workloads to what type of clouds and why? And actually, you need to step back and start doing some kind of regression style analysis to look for not just correlation but causation. And what we're finding is that there's actually a wide range of reasons why that happens, and it depends on the type of company that the organization is. Are they kind of on the bleeding edge of adopting new technology? If so, then their propensity to move to cloud is different to more of a kind of a traditional player or laggard. Now, for the other aspect of that is that the cloud is. Back to you. Sorry, lost my train of thought.
Any thoughts on,
I can take that.
Yeah, any thoughts on
absolutely,
that?
absolutely. Yeah, so when I think about how and why, it goes back to that conversation of trust that I was talking about a second ago. So if you're a system integrator, you have the attention of your customers and they trust you. They're going to go with whatever solution it happens to be that you're talking about. And I think there's a lot of power in that. We've actually seen that play out in our data, that trust is a major buying, at least part of the decision anyway, but it plays out majorly across the board. So, if the cloud service provider is the person that's in there and they're the ones having the conversation, it goes to the cloud. If it's, whatever, that's who is being successful. And so I think, that sort of underscores for the service providers how they should be thinking about this. And number one, first and foremost, I should be gaining the trust of my customer. And that comes along with understanding the customer, understanding what their needs are, not just being a product pusher, but actually having solutions that solve real problems that are real pain in the rear for your customers, and you're sort of offloading some of that burden. They're going to be your customer for a very long time if you're removing pains in the rear from them.
Yeah. I found it interesting that security, when enterprises were talking about which venue they were going to pick, on-prem, hosted, software as a service, or infrastructure as a service, they inherently thought that an on-prem solution was going to be more secure than any of those other choices, when in reality, some of these big hyperscalers have thousands of people just dedicated to security.
They make it their business to ensure that your business is secure. I mean, the last thing that they want is to...
So there's a lot of market education still to be done to get some of these
There really is, and there's a kind of question to what degree is security being used as a justification not to go to cloud. And the other aspect is security is one word, but just means so many different things. It depends what aspects of security, compliance is thrown in there, privacy, those types of aspects are thrown in there as well. But we consistently see that security is the number one reason for organizations not to move to the cloud. It'll be interesting to see over time how that kind of starts to change.
Sure. So Dan, citing other Voice of the Enterprise research, when we ask people the top characteristics of a provider, what are the top three things they want to see out of a provider? Security, obviously, still at the top of the list, up there with reliability and trustworthiness. But we're starting to see some other characteristics creep into that list. Like, how has that cloud environment evolved over the last 2 years?
Well, so what's interesting about that data, and the people watching this after the fact will actually get to see the slide, but at the very bottom of that, what we're seeing creep up is, things like the company understands my business, which I've kind of touched on already. The next one is they have a vertical specialty. And so for me, that's sort of the next question for cloud, and sort of the next question for managed services providers is, is like, what do you have for me as a healthcare provider, or what do you have for me as a financial services provider? Because it's no longer cloud for cloud's sake, it's cloud for my business's sake, and how are you making my business better? And so, if we dive into healthcare specifically and we think about just the HIPAA laws, especially in the smaller practices around the country, those doctors are scared to death that the Office of Civil Rights is going to slap them with $1 million fine because somebody lost a thumb drive. If you can solve that problem for them, you're going to make money off of these people, because they want somebody to help them through that and to sort of ease their concerns that Big Brother is watching over their shoulder and they're going to get slapped with fines.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting point. And the reality is that this market is maturing, right? And organizations are moving to want more sophisticated capabilities. They're looking to move away from just kind of feeds and speeds, like just give me this amount of compute or this amount of storage for less than I'm paying today, to actually being a partner and helping me transform my business. We've been asking our research, to what extent do organizations looking to transform their IT overall? About 50% of organizations actually have an IT transformation initiative underway today, and in larger enterprises that's even higher. And on average, they're looking to transform about 50% of their total IT environment. So half of the companies we're talking to are transforming half of their environment. That's just massive opportunity. And I think organizations are now open to doing and considering things that they perhaps didn't consider in the past, because they know they just have to make that change. Again, I think that really does open the door for service providers with more mature, more relationship-led capabilities to thrive.
So and another opportunity for service providers and software providers is supporting this movement towards hybrid cloud, where enterprises are looking to bridge on-premise or hosted private cloud with public cloud, or just two venues in general, and having a consistent software suite to manage and orchestrate across that. Big opportunity for service providers. Amazon Web Services, probably not an area where you could say they won, because they don't play on that private on-premise space. Like, is this trend towards hybrid cloud, Simon, real? Like, what's the enterprise is saying as far as their interest in adoption?
We hear a lot about hybrid cloud from the vendors, but we don't see a lot of adoption from the from customers themselves. About 15% of organizations who are doing cloud are doing some form of hybrid cloud today. And by hybrid cloud, I mean actually probably the purest sense of the word, where you take a single workload or application, are able to distribute that single application
seamlessly
across multiple venues seamlessly. And does everybody want to do that for all their applications? Well, probably not.
Would they need to?
If you've got a bursty, a spiky type of application, then potentially. What we see more is in the realm of multi-cloud. So organizations choosing different types of cloud to satisfy different types of requirements. Now, I think over time there is an opportunity to make to evolve that hybrid model, but we don't see an awful lot of organisations embracing that today. I think one of the challenges there is that in the past we just haven't seen the partnerships and alliances between traditional on-prem suppliers and the hyperscale cloud providers to actually enable that type of capability. That is starting to change, and we are certainly seeing more in the way of relationships to help that in areas such as storage, even in the networking space as well. So it's starting to change, but it's early days.
Okay, yeah, sure. Managed services, our market monitor shows that the percentage of service provider revenue is going to be like 39% managed over the next couple of years. So there's a lot more movement towards that, and it's management of things beyond just compute and storage infrastructure, right, as far as the spend is concerned. Like, how should enterprises start thinking about managed services, whether it's on top of AWS or on top of hosted private cloud environments? How should they start thinking about managed services?
So, I mean, the way, if I'm an enterprise and I'm thinking about consuming a managed service, I mean, the way I attack this problem is, what is my biggest burden? What's the biggest pain in the rear that I'm having to deal with? What do my IT staff not like doing and regularly just set to the side? Those are great opportunities for managed services to come in and help. And frankly, I think that's why disaster recovery, backup services are so popular, because people hate dealing with backups because they're constantly failing. I don't care who the vendor is, your backups, they're going to fail for whatever reason. It just happens, right?
Sure.
So, that's a wonderful opportunity. But then, you start looking at the business and thinking, well, what would happen if my IT people weren't spending time doing X, and instead they're focusing on Y? So maybe the X is what I farm out to a managed service provider, let them deal with that, and sort of move your IT staff up the stack, so to speak, bring them more into the business unit, help them start driving business efficiencies and new processes, and sort of this ancillary, sort of the menial stuff, let it fall to the wayside.
So Simon, last question to you. Is there an opportunity for more hyperscale vendors in this space? What do you think?
So I think in theory there is. This is now the challenge is that now the costs to enter this market are non-trivial. They're significant, and it's going to take a major player a decision to make a major investment. As you noted, we've already seen many of the traditional players kind of dip a toe into the public cloud space and kind of get out of there because they've just not been able to make the economics work. So I think it's not out of the question. The other aspect here is that I think many enterprises have not yet given up on-prem. Right, so they're still looking to reinvent, to re-platform, transform their on-prem IT, both for legacy style applications, but also for new style applications as well. And I think the major suppliers are really looking to enable that, transform that through new capabilities. It's difficult to see how quick that's going to happen quickly, but I wouldn't rule it out.
Great. Well, Dan, Simon, I think we went through a lot, and there's a lot that we gave people to think about. As far as that question, has AWS won? I think the short answer is it depends on how you define one. It's still, as you pointed out, early days, and regardless of the answer, there's still opportunity for others for sure. So we want to thank you all for participating, and have a great day. Thank you.